Welcome to another Perspectives podcast. I'm here with the man himself, Mr. Chase Brown. How you doing, sir?
Dude, I'm doing really, really good, man.
You're doing really good?
Yeah.
Life is good?
Life's good.
How are the kids?
God's good, bro.
Oh, you're not even kids.
You know we ain't there yet.
That was a joke. We'll edit that out. I'm sorry.
It's a hope. It's a hope. One day, man. I just need to find future Mrs. Brown first.
Okay. Yeah, Mrs. Brown. Yeah.
Shameless plug there.
Yeah.
Exactly. Shameless plug.
Wait. Hold up. I feel like I heard someone else's voice.
Oh, yeah.
Chase. I feel like every time we do these podcasts, that means we have a special guest on.
Special guest.
This time we have the man himself. He is a very, what was the word I used earlier about the Instagram thing?
Like he's just a very genuine human.
Yeah.
You know what? He's just about supporting people.
Yeah.
You know, if you're gonna hit him with that follow button,
Yeah.
he's gonna hit you with the follow button back.
I literally went on his Instagram, and the same amount of people that he's following is the same amount of people he's following back. I'm like, this is a genuine guy. You know, I love people like this. You know, high character.
Exactly. Like he's a legend.
Yeah.
He's
for sure.
What are you? 6'3", 6'4"?
6'6".
6'6".
Excuse my language.
6'3".
6'6".
Close enough.
Yeah, he was almost there.
He is a part of the Archer family.
Oh yeah, the legends.
So we might as well call him Hawkeye from the Avengers.
Wow. Yeah.
But yeah.
That's the
Yeah,
first.
we have Mr. Jared Archer himself.
Yeah.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
for being here, spending time with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. How you doing, man?
Yeah.
Doing good. Yeah. Excited to be here.
Yeah. A little bit of a long day at work today, but
Yeah.
it's good.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Man.
I feel that's usually work. You know, just sometimes long days, and you're just like, eh. And then Fridays, it feels a little bit better.
Oh, Fridays are the best.
Oh,
Yes, dude.
for sure.
So true, man.
so yeah, I mean, just to kind of dive into it. I know we gave you this very nice, lovely introduction, but people obviously don't know who you are, and they're kind of curious why we chose to bring you on. We know why. We wanted to have you on, but tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your background, if you want to share where you work, some of your interests, just so people can get to know you a little bit.
Yeah. So I like long walks on the beach.
There it goes.
There we go. Solid number one
Love
description.
High
reading.
character. Yeah.
That's solid number 2. There we go.
Love beach sunsets.
Wow.
There we go.
Wow.
Dude, this is so good right now.
Wow. It really is.
Yeah. No, but for real, I'm born and raised here in the great state of Texas.
There it goes.
Amen.
Love Texas, and I was actually homeschooled all the way from kindergarten through high school.
There we go.
Went to school here in Texas. Started out just studying my associates in business, and then realized I was one of those weird people who actually liked the accounting classes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Special kind.
Yeah.
And I was like, if this is making sense and I remotely enjoy this, maybe I should pursue this as a career. And so as I was studying that, I kind of fell into the forensic accounting field, and where I can do kind of the overarching idea is just catching the bad guys that are committing financial fraud. And so that's that's what I went to school and studied, and I graduated this past December. And so
Congrats.
thank you. And so that's kind of my end goal. I think I still want to do something in that field. Right now I'm working at an accounting firm that kind of is in that field, but we don't do as much like forensic accounting as I envision myself doing down the road. So hopefully this is just kind of a stepping stone into that. But I mean, I love what I do, and I think it's been a great experience so far. So that's the very high level version of me. If you only had 2 seconds to get to know me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And member of Gateway Church.
Oh, yeah.
Which is so good. You volunteer, whatever. Volunteer is an okay word. So I'll say serve.
There you go.
At young adults and is it just young adults or any other ministries?
I was serving at the weekend services.
There
as
we go.
well.
Awesome.
I love the altar ministry.
Yeah, man. Amen. It's needed. But yeah, so met you through Gateway and just an awesome dude. But yeah.
you probably actually don't know this, but one of my friends went on a trip, one of the ones we're going to discuss later on. And so she was telling me a little bit about the trip. You know, we're texting during the trip. And she was like, yeah, I mean, my trip is mostly just filled with girls, but we have this guy, his leader, he's so great. I was like, really? And she was like, yeah, I mean, you know, him just putting up with us and just leading so well, and everybody listens to him. I'm like, who is this guy? Like, and she sent me the picture, and I was like, wow. So,
Mr. Archer.
yeah, there he goes, the man himself. Yeah, no, I mean, I think ever since I've kind of just seen you around, you know, young adults and stuff like that, and just knowing that you serve, you know, that's one thing that's been consistent. Always seeing you present, always seeing you serving, always seeing you being intentional about being in people's lives. And even just those things that she was saying about you, when I saw the picture, I was like, oh, yeah, of course.
Yep.
You know, so yeah. So I think we usually just ask, you know, people that we bring on, like, if you want to kind of get into your story a little bit in terms of, you know, what was that come to Jesus moment? If you kind of want to give us, you know, your testimony, kind of, because testimonies speak, you know,
Amen.
such volume. So,
Absolutely.
you know, we would love to hear that. Yeah.
I'd love to. So I grew up in the church. I wasn't always serving, but I was always going to church on a regular basis. My parents always took me to church, and I'm glad that I did that, and I'm glad that my parents really raised me in church. But I think it wasn't until my later teens, and I remember the day that I got saved in church. I was really, really young, and I remember like walking up to the altar and then going into this weird back room and saying a prayer, and then I don't remember exactly what happened, but I made it back to my parents. And that's what matters.
Amen.
And so I remember just being like, you know, it's kind of the typical like going through the motions type of a thing was kind of the picture of my relationship with Jesus. Or really at that point, it wasn't much of a relationship. It was just kind of a one-sided like, hey, God, what can you give me? And like make me feel good about myself and all this stuff. And so my older brother moved off to college in Alabama. He went to Highlands College, which is part of Church of the Highlands up there.
There we go.
It's a great church and has very similar DNA to Gateway. And so I remember one time we went and served up there, and my brother was always serving and always volunteering. And I was like, I just never really got it. You know, I was like, I don't really get why you choose to do that. Because like, what could you possibly get out of that? You know, was kind of my mentality. And so it wasn't until I saw like him actually like in his element serving up there and like the kind of difference that he was making that I was like, okay, I think I should start taking this volunteering thing more seriously. And so I did. And so I started getting plugged in with church, and that's been that was when I think kind of that moment. I know I've been kind of centering it on the idea of serving, but I think really that was kind of the moment where I just started to kind of take my faith personally for myself and it wasn't just something that my parents did. This is something like, okay, I'm choosing to go on a Tuesday night to volunteer. I'm choosing to go on a Saturday morning to volunteer, or Saturday night to volunteer for the service. And so I think that was a big shift for me. So kind of backtracking back to my teens, one of the things that I think was a big piece of the puzzle that has been missing in my life was I had a lot of just unforgiveness in my heart. And I hadn't really dealt with that in a healthy way. And I didn't really realize that it was there. Because if you, like, for me personally, I just would get so busy that I'm like, I don't have time to deal with this. You know I'm mad at my parents, my dad for this, my dad for that. A lot of my anger and bitterness was towards my dad for some of the things that I felt like he let me down on and just wasn't around and blah, blah, blah. Love my dad. He's a great guy. But I think just growing up and some of the perspectives that I had of like what a father should do just I wasn't seeing that in my dad. And so that really like twisted that for me and made me just really bitter and upset with my dad. Anyways, I remember at one point, it was in my teens, we were, I think I'd had the birds and the bees talk, you know, at that point. I was probably like 13 or 14. And one of our homeschool families that we knew had one of the sons was a missionary to Ukraine.
Wow.
And he was in town, and he's like kind of their like trophy child. Like they're really proud, and rightly so. Like he's an awesome, upstanding man of God. And so, but they're a very conservative family, so they kind of had this men's night retreat out at their house, and so we all came to hear what he had to say. And I remember very few things that he said that night, except one thing, which was he was talking about sexual sin, and he goes, "It is a sin to masturbate." And I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so I didn't even know at 13 or 14 like what he was even talking about.
Yeah.
So on the way, I think we like camped out there and drove home in the morning. So on the way home, it's me, my older brother, and my dad. And I'm like, Dad, like, what is that? Because like, I want to know if I'm sinning. I don't want to sin. So, and so my dad like explained what it was, and I was like, okay. So I think just from then on, I'd always been curious about like, okay, what is this whole thing and sex and everything. And so I remember the very first time I like experimented with that. And I remember it was a time when I was really just frustrated and upset with life, or just whatever it was that was going on that I was mad about. I remember just like opening the door to that. And ever since then, I was just like hooked on that, and it starts as something that like, they say curiosity kills the cat. And I think that is true, that curiosity opens the door to that.
Yeah.
And so I found myself in that, and really in my teen years all the way up until probably 20, 21 years old, like serving Jesus in the church, trying to do the right things, but I just couldn't like get over this one issue. And what started out as just like inappropriate pictures turned into pornography. And like I was so ashamed of myself, and I could not like imagine. I'm like, I want to do the right things, and I want to serve, and I want to be a holy child of God, or whatever God requires of me. Was my perspective of it. But I always thought of, I think it's Paul when he talks about the thorn in his flesh that he asked 3 times for the Lord to remove. And the Lord said, my grace is sufficient for you. And I always thought of that, and I was like, well, I guess this is just my thorn in the flesh.
Wow.
And I'm just going to have to like learn to be more disciplined and harder on myself, and just be better and do better and do more. And eventually this will go away. But all the while, and I'm trying to connect this to the earlier point, which was all the frustration and bitterness and anger and unforgiveness that I had in my heart, was what started out as something as curiosity turned into a coping mechanism to deal with the pain and the hurt and the frustration, instead of like going to my dad and actually reconciling the relationship and forgiving and moving on and healing my heart, what was broken in my heart. I was coping with just like what other people cope with, alcohol or cigarettes or whatever it may be. I was using pornography and masturbating to cope with that. And it was just a cycle of shame and guilt. And I had believed so many lies about the way God saw me and the way he looked at me. And it was all based on, believe it or not, I know people say this all the time, but the way you see your earthly dad affects the way you see your heavenly father. And I'd always heard that, and I was like, yeah, okay, but I know that's not true, blah, blah, blah. God's totally not my dad. But it wasn't until I like realized, oh my gosh, like I had to confront the fact that this is what I believe about God. This is what I believe about the way he sees me. And it wasn't until then that I brought it to the Lord, and he was like, but that's not, like, he was so kind and sweet. He was like, but who is that? And I was like, oh, that's my earthly dad. Wow. And I was like, dang. And so it's, long story short, it's been a process of, over this past year, of him really revealing who he truly is and how much he loves me, and how there is no shame when he looks at me, and there's, just so much grace and forgiveness for me that it was like, okay, that's what I needed to get free. And so this year has really just been learning that and re-finding who God is, and his character. And it's been the best thing ever, because I remember I was going through a curriculum. It was Jimmy Evans, actually, 21-day total freedom journey, and amazing curriculum. If you need freedom from anything, or just even if you don't have any vice or whatever you want to call it, like, it's just such a good thing. But one of the very first things he says on like day 2 of the journey, he's like, looks dead in the camera and he's like, you can be completely 100% free. And I was like, this guy, he doesn't know what
He have the nerve to say that.
You don't know how long I've been dealing with this, man. And Paul even said, like, this is a thorn in the side. It's going to be here forever, you know? And I had to confront that. Again, that was just a lie that I believed. And so just cannot speak well enough of that program, for one thing. Yeah. But really, it's just been the Lord continuing to reveal that to just different aspects of what I believed about him. And so I would say, I started taking my faith seriously when I was, in my teens, 15, 16, 17 years old. But it wasn't until lately that I've actually been able to walk in actual freedom. And it's not one of the biggest things that I've had to learn is just that it's not really about freedom from that. It's really about freedom to have a relationship with Jesus. Wow. And I've never had such a close relationship with Jesus than now. And I'm so free and so thankful. And so anyways, that's, if anything to say all that is just that, like, if there's anybody listening that doesn't feel like they can have hope or can be free or whatever you're struggling with, like, Jesus is bigger than that, and you don't have to continue to live in that. And he has so much better and more for you, and he loves you so much. So
yeah, and
that was the longest testimony ever.
No, dude, that was so good. Yeah. Because in that vulnerability, it's something that people will be able to relate with. Yeah. And I know, I know you as friends, I know your heart. Like, that's something that you want, not just the people that are in your life, but anyone that you can encourage to be able to gain that freedom in Christ, through your testimony. Yeah. And being able to share that vulnerably from my experience with you, I don't think you deal with any sort of pride or humility issues, but is you even continuing to grow in that and being able to articulate, hey, none of this was me. It was all the Holy Spirit working in me. Right. And I'm willing to say that so that anyone out there who may be struggling with that is able to think of things properly. Because another thing that you were kind of talking about in terms of a distorted view of the Father, man, I think that's something that the Father is really just wanting to speak to the churches a whole right now. Because even Cody Carnes' song, A Run to the Father, that's been my jam for the past couple months. But even Jake Moore, who was talking about that on the Berlin and Swiss Alps trip, and I feel like that's just been reiterated by so many people over, at least from what I've encountered, the last few months. And with that, so many things can stem from a distorted view of the Father, as well as a distorted understanding or misplacing of our identity.
Absolutely.
Because I know that's something that Tim Keller talks about in his book, Reason for God, is the root of sin for him, from what God's revealed to him, is a misplaced identity. And I think maybe another extension we can add on to that is any distorted view of the Father can turn that misplaced identity into some sort of addiction. Because, as you said, it can be used as a coping mechanism or something just to deny that. And so, yeah, we really appreciate you being vulnerable in that, because that's what's needed to have genuine connections, genuine fellowship. Because so much of the American church now is just kind of oh, like we'll put up the facade of contentment and okayness, rather than really addressing the issues that like the Father really wants us to address in community.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think something as well, going off of kind of what you'd said previously in your testimony, is as far as like serving and whenever you started to like really walk genuinely in your faith, like I think that's something that kind of is, I don't want to say always partnered with each other, but I think that like spending time serving and spending time in those different things is kind of like a sign of maturing in faith and being willing to, as it says, like your treasure is, oh my gosh, why am I blanking on this?
Your treasure's where your heart is where your treasure.
Your heart is where your treasure is. And with that, a lot of how we spend time is like what we care about. And so from there, like being able to, like a fruit of genuine faith is us caring about our faith and then spending time on that. And so that could be a fruit that like we even see from that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like what Chase was saying. That's, even in my own life, I feel like I always say this when we share their stories, but I relate to that, being in that same position. And for me, whenever, I kind of received freedom from that, it was one of those things where like I shared it with anybody who cared to listen. And oftentimes like I would get feedback from people where they were like, aren't you afraid of like sharing too much? I'm like, it's not me anymore. Like, like, what does that matter? Like, it's not me anymore. And just, tasting freedom and seeing what that does for other people. So yeah, I mean, like kind of what Chase said, thanks for, for sharing all of that.
Absolutely.
We appreciate that. But in terms of like, serving and what that did for you, like, and even just what the model that your brother was, in your life, and like we mentioned earlier, serving at the church. What, how has that helped your, I guess, relationship with God in terms of just serving His people and also, kind of having both relationships going?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Jesus said, there's no greater joy there's no greater love than that somebody can have than to lay down his life for somebody. And obviously serving is not completely laying your life down for somebody. If you are, then that's awesome. And I commend you because I haven't done that, obviously. I'm still here, so I haven't done that. And I think one of the things, one of my friends, we were kind of talking, and I grew up with my best friend. He's 2 weeks older than I am, but he's actually Catholic, and he always referred to me as Protestant, because we're Protestants and Catholics. And he kind of got on this volunteering, serving kick before I did, and he was talking about how when he volunteers and when he gives back, and it's so much better for him, like he receives so much out of it. And the word he used was like he receives grace from that. And it was almost like, I didn't know if he meant like actual forgiveness of his sins by his actions because of their perspective on that. But I think that is so true. I've thought about that more and more in my life. Not that my actions could ever forgive my sins, but just that we do receive something in return when we give something away. It's more blessed to give than to receive. And so, man, and it helps me, I think. So I'm an introvert, and I am very introspective and think about what I'm thinking about a lot. And so if I do that and I get so self-centered and so self-focused, it can get really dark, and I can really just be focused on the wrong things sometimes. Sometimes it is really needed to take a step back and to think and to reflect, and all those things are healthy. But doing that too much, I think, has a tendency to be unhealthy for me. And so serving other people helps me get my eyes off of myself and really just focus on and recognize, like, hey, this world is a lot bigger than the problems that I may be facing and the things I may be going through. Like, it allows me to gain a different perspective on what they're going through and how I can be the hands and feet of Jesus in that moment. And so I think that's why it's been such a key part of my relationship with Jesus, and helps me really feel like I'm making a difference in this world too. So
I mean, I think even like within the church and kind of Paul kind of going through this, talking about the body and how, we help one another out. He emphasized a lot of times how important it is for us to serve one another with the gifts that we've been given. Through all the different books that he writes, I'm thinking of a couple, off the top of my head right now, where he's like, especially like even like in Ephesians 4, he talks about you've been graced with the gift and you got to serve others with that, and not only through serving you're able to build relationships, right? Through serving you're able to be there for people that you really see the heart of, kind of like you mentioned, being the hands and feet, of Jesus in the lives of other people. So I think, serving is such a great tool, for us as believers and just people in general.
Yeah.
And something that you brought up as well is like whenever you're serving, you're able to intentionally get your eyes off yourself. Because me, like I don't know if I'm an introvert, but I definitely struggle with perfectionism and thinking about everything that I do a lot. And so whenever I do serve, I'm able to like fully focus on other people. And I know that's something that's often been said about humility is it's not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less.
Yeah, that's good.
And so in that, the more that we're able to serve, the more that we're able to, in action, love other people, we're able to take that focus off of ourselves, remove any sort of like issues with pride or self-worth that could be going on, and really allow like Jesus to do a work on our heart, and through that focus on others, him be able to speak that truth into us instead of us just like telling ourselves lies or accepting lies. And so I think it's been really cool that serving has been a really good theme throughout your walk, like kind of ever since a relatively young age. But in that, something that it developed to was missions, which is one of the cool things within the church and one of the things that we want to have you talk about. So would you want to talk about a little bit, just kind of, if you remember it, like how God got you into missions, short-term mission trips, and then just some of the impactful experiences in those?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key phrase is if I'll remember it. Because I was sitting here and I was like, I can remember for sure the details of the first mission trip. I mean, it was only back in 2017, so it was 2 years ago. But I'm trying to remember exactly how I got roped into the first mission trip. I remember I was serving at young adults and, just plugging away there and loving that. And I had a couple of friends that were going on this trip to Tijuana.
There we go.
And I was like, I really can't remember who was the first person who brought up the idea to me.
Who was leading that trip? Was it
Joseph Kiefer?
Joseph, yes.
And Justin Mackey.
Oh, Justin as well. Oh, that would have been an awesome trip.
Yeah,
Dang.
It was really powerful. And I think it might have been Joseph or Justin that had mentioned it to me.
Okay.
Now that you mentioned it.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because they had, I think is pretty consistent with most mission trips. There's a lot of females that take the initiative and sign up and are like, yes, let's go. I think guys, for whatever reason, tend to drag their feet on signing up for mission trips. And so they were really trying to rally a bunch of guys, I think, at that point. And so they had talked to me and my older brother and my younger brother, Joshua and Judson, and convinced one or two of us, and then the others followed. And so that's how I got involved with the first mission trip. Was that the full extent of
that?
question?
And then just like talking a little bit about like how those mission trips experiences just kind of shaped your faith, and how serving on those like allowed you to grow in your relationship with the Father, or just any of those impactful experiences.
Yeah. So I kind of had grown up like not, I say that like as if I had this idea since I was 3 years old, but I had been raised and had the idea of like, okay, I should go on a mission trip at some point. I've heard, it'll change your life, it'll change your perspective, give you a new appreciation for life, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, cool. I know eventually I want to do this. And so I think once it was introduced to me, the idea of going to Tijuana was like, okay, this is actually doable. It was less than $1,000 to go.
Yep.
I was like, I can definitely raise that money. And so being on the trip, it really did. Like everything that people say about mission trips, and they're like, get up on stage and like, it'll change your life, it'll change your perspective, it'll, give you a new appreciation for your life, and it'll give you a new heart for people and all this stuff. And you're kind of like, yeah, okay, cool. No, like it really will. Like
Yeah.
I remember going to Mexico, and it's still really close to the United States. But so we flew into San Diego, and then we took a bus through the border to get to Tijuana because it's a border city.
Yeah.
And I remember you're driving to Tijuana, and you're looking at the mountainside, and you can see like this is California, the side that's California, and then there's like a definitive line where it turns to Mexico, and there's just like basically huts all over this mountainside, and just
Dang.
covered in you can see the marked difference in income levels and the poverty there. And it was like, you hear about certain countries and third world countries and how they don't have as much as we have, and we're so blessed. But until you go and see it for yourself, and you're like, wow, literally this is the border, and this is such a stark contrast between the blessings that we have as a nation in our country versus the things that they have to deal with in that country. Really just, it does open your eyes and gives you new perspective. And so I think that was the biggest thing for me. I learned on that mission trip, Joseph and Justin are both very intentional people, intentional leaders. And I remember one of the nights that I'll have a hard time forgetting was we did kind of like a group debrief. And instead of like going over highs and lows, we just did worship, played it over the sound system in the church there that we were at. And then we had, it was just kind of like an open prophetic, like go around, and if you get a word for somebody, you go share it with them.
Yeah.
And, I'm kind of semi new to like taking my faith seriously at that point. And so I'm like, I've never done prophetic before. I've had people give me prophetic words, and I've been like, wow, I don't know how you knew that. That's cool. But I was like, me prophetic? No, that's probably not. But that night, I just remember it was like just word after word after word for so many different people. And it was like, I'd just be sitting there, and I'd get this feeling and this like burden in my heart to share this. And I'm like, I have to do this now. And so that was just a really cool moment in that trip that really changed my perspective to see like, okay, maybe there's a prophetic gifting on the inside of me that I just haven't even realized, that's never even been tapped into. And so ever since then, and the trip that I had the privilege of going on or leading recently was very focused on that. And so it was cool to get to see how that trip really kind of opened the door into me being more comfortable operating in that gifting that I didn't even know that was there, And so, and then just, seeing the people that we helped, we partnered with a church there, and then there were members of the church that had a house that was dilapidated. So we'd go and help, fix that, and just play with orphans, and then do street evangelism. And we went to this one drug rehab facility to just be with the people there. And you think drug rehab facility, you'd think in the States that's probably like 20, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds maybe, upper age. These were literal kids that were in there with knuckle tattoos and probably 13, 14 years old.
Wow.
And just hearing some of their stories and hearing how they had to run for their lives from the drug lords there. And just obviously that's not the picture of all of Mexico, but that is a picture of some of the people's lives.
It's one of the struggles there. Yeah.
Right. And so to me, it was like, you hear those stories and you think those things, but to see it in real life and see such a young person having to deal with all that. And it was like, man, it breaks your heart in the like best kind of way. Like, and so I think those are some of the key moments. And I just remember even those boys, like they loved getting to hang out with us and just play with us. And like they had the time of their lives, and we didn't even have to like do anything special. It was just such an honor for them to have us over there, and we made such a difference. And then we did a skit, and I think several of them got saved, and it was just powerful moments like that throughout the whole trip.
Yeah, man, that's like a couple things that you brought up. I feel like get brought up every podcast, but for us, like it's just God reaffirming some of the ideas that He's given us. But like, yeah, man, I mean, and part of what you brought up about God changing your perspective, opening your eyes through missions, I mean, that's part of the reason why God gave us the name Perspectives. The organization is like, there's things that you experience on trips. There's realities of this world and realities of like the spiritual world of the Father's character that are revealed that you can't see unless you travel outside of like your comfort zone, unless you travel outside of everything that you know, and go on an adventure. Very similarly to how the Father commanded Abraham to go on an adventure and leave his parents' house at 90 whatever freaking years old it was. Those are things that are practical things that we're called to do today. And for us to be able to really experience, learn of more of the Father's character, but then in that grow in a relationship with Him and experience everything that His Spirit can do in us. It's things that we have to travel, and there's things that He's gonna open our eyes to that we're not gonna be able to unsee. That, like for what you were saying, will put a burden on our heart to really like love and like care for those people. And so it's really interesting, but then as well, like anytime you go into like unfamiliar places and really step out in faith to the Lord, because thinking about it, that's what going into unfamiliar place is stepping out in faith to Him. Like He's going to reveal either more parts of His character or spiritual gifts in you that you did not know of before. Because in facing unfamiliar situations, you have to tap into unknown or unfamiliar areas of your being, of your character that God placed in there. And that in His plan is something that He knew that experience was going to come up and that time was going to come up, and that you're going to need to draw that gift out to be able to walk in obedience in that situation. Because I think of even like Josue over in China, him, I would say he already knew of the gift of teaching that he had before then, with being able to lead small group. Shout out JOT.
Shout out JOT.
Always. And the different things that he's been walking in here. But on that trip, he was even more able to walk into that of teaching at the conference over there and everything. And so like, it's so cool that those things just continue to get affirmed. Like, testimony after testimony by people who are sharing, and that like for you as a friend and an individual, that God was able to do that. That opportunity wasn't wasted, and that the Father was faithful in that situation. Like Jesus was there walking with you step by step, and that it was amazing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I also just love the point that you made about how you're able to receive a prophetic word during your first trip, and how that's kind of been a part of your life, and especially being able to, operate in that even more on this last trip. Almost dropped the mic. Because I feel like, it's going to sound pretty loud. We'll edit it out. No, because I mean, during the trip, like I mentioned my friend, and so she kind of kept me updated on what you guys were doing, and I was like, man, that sounds like amazing, the whole time. The whole time you guys were there, and just different ways you guys got to speak or pray for people, the things you guys got to see or witness and all that. And I was like, man, that's so I kind of followed your trip, even though I wasn't physically there, and I wanted you to also kind of speak on that even more, because she shared some crazy stories with us. What were some of the things that you were just like, God, I don't know how you did that. I knew this wasn't us. This was only you who was able to do something like this. So, some stories that maybe even something you heard, something you saw, something you witnessed.
Yeah.
I think stories really help paint a great picture for us.
Yeah. I just think like where to even begin with this trip, because basically from day one, there were moments of us really encountering Jesus and us bringing Jesus to these people. So we partnered with a ministry called Amazing Love Ministries. The guy who leads that, his name's Wally Cook, and his wife, I think it's Sherry.
Okay.
I don't want to butcher that, but she is a support for his ministry, so I didn't want to let her go unnoticed. But regardless, he partners with several churches in the area to really what he does is he provides a healing ministry is one of the biggest aspects of what he does. And I was really intimidated by that, just being completely honest, because if you see somebody like Todd White or somebody out there who's laying hands on people and commanding them to be healed and their bodies to come into alignment with the will of God, like you see that happen and you're like, I want to believe that I could be a part of that.
Yeah.
But I also know me, and I also know that I've prayed for people before and haven't seen that happen before.
Right.
So anyways, when I found out that that was kind of the nature of this trip, or would be a big emphasis of this trip, I was kind of freaked out. I was like, oh gosh, like I don't know that I'm comfortable with praying for people like that and believing, like I want to have faith for that, but I don't know that I do.
Yeah.
And so that in and of itself was a huge learning process for me. But regardless, the kind of the main focus of this mission trip and the teams that go with to El Salvador with Wally is to go to the various churches that he's partnered with and to provide altar ministry, basically. And they know Wally, they've seen him work miracles, and they've seen the teams that come with him work miracles. And so they literally will have like, it's kind of a rally night. They're like, hey, they tell people, weeks in advance, hey, we're going to have a team from the United States come and they're going to pray for you and believe for healing and all this stuff. And so there's a ton of expectancy by these people, and they're so hungry and so thirsty for God, and so hungry for a touch from him that they really, like Wally, he says it best. He says they really just pull it out of you, because their faith is so high that it's like, man, I could say, blue elephant, some random sentence, and you probably get healed because you're here believing that it's going to happen. And so that was it was cool to experience that. And from day one, so the first day we had 2 church services that we went to, and I was kind of like, I was intimidated at first, but then he has a book that he has us read about how he prays for people, and that really kind of like, okay, I think I'm tracking now and I feel like I'm ready. And so I was going into this trip like, I want to pray for somebody to like has pain in their leg or pain in their feet or whatever, and pray and it go away, or like some crazy bizarre, like it's only God could do this kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So the first 2 days were really more interestingly geared towards like the people that came up were like, hey, I'm struggling with depression, or I'm struggling with my husband doesn't love me or something, like random things that's like, okay, well, yeah, we can absolutely pray for that. And seeing the Lord, like, so we would have, because they speak Spanish in El Salvador, and or a variation of that, and I'm not fluent in Spanish, so we would have to have translators help us with that. And so it was interesting, like we would usually be 2 people praying with the translator for that one person, 2 team members. And so it was just really powerful to be able to pray for somebody, and then you could sense, like, I've never felt the Lord like speak so clearly to me through prayer to somebody.
So good.
And he would just like start giving me things and so I start praying, and then you're like, I don't even know if this is gonna make sense for you, but I'm gonna pray this, and then they translate it and they just start bawling. And so it's just powerful moments like that, and you're like, man, I know that something happened, some sort of breakthrough happened in their heart. If I had to pick one thing that was like my favorite thing of the entire trip, so there were several moments like that where we prayed for people and saw breakthrough. The last day we were there, we were going to a school, and we were going to all share, like a few of us were going to share our testimonies, and then afterwards we're going to have altar ministry and like, hey, if you have pain in your back, like we'll pray for you and believe for God to heal you. And these kids, like this last school that we were at, they were just like super resistant to us. Like they came and sat down and they listened to what we had to say, but you could just tell like they weren't, it was night and day different from those churches that were like pulling it out of us. You know, these guys were like, what are these gringos doing in our school? Like we could be playing soccer right now or something, you know? And so but I had the opportunity to share my testimony, and I shared everything that I shared with you guys tonight with them, and that was actually the first time I'd ever like shared that publicly. Wow. And I was kind of like freaked out to do that, but I was like, kind of what you said, Josue, is like, this is not me anymore, so there isn't shame, and I'm proud of what God's done in my life, so I want to share it. And so I did that, and then afterwards I was kind of like, okay, cool, like now we're going to have altar ministry, and all these kids are going to come up and get prayer. And
excuse the clock in the background.
It's not really happening.
No big deal. It's
just,
all in your head.
No, it's 10 p.m. right now, so it just goes off.
And so I was like, you know, all these kids are going to come forward. This is going to be an awesome response. Well, nobody came forward. And so we were like, okay, well, we're just going to walk around, and if the Lord gives you a word of knowledge or says like anything to you, then pray for people. And so we kind of like did that, and I was really uncomfortable with that. I wasn't real sure, like, just walk around, all these kids are just looking at you like, what are you doing, you know? And so, but this I had my translator ask this group of boys, I was like, hey, I just still hadn't really prayed for somebody's physical healing yet to see that happen. I mean, I'd prayed with one of my team members for a lady for the pain in her feet and her hips to go away, and it went away, and so that was cool. But I was like, I just for some reason had felt like the Lord wanted me to pray for somebody's back this whole week. So I was like, you know what, this is the last day, they're not coming up, I'm just gonna have to ask them, hey, does anybody have pain in their back that they want to get prayer for? And one of these kids was like, yeah, kind of like I have some pain in my back. And so put my hands on him, on his lower back, and commanded the pain to go away, told his body to be healed. And my translator asked him, and like try to keep it a short prayer, so he just asked me, he's like, so, you know, is it same, better, or worse? He's like, yeah, it's a little better. And so we're like, okay, well, we're gonna pray again. So we prayed again, and then the second time he was like, yeah, and we like usually have him move around to kind of test out, like, hey, does it feel better? And he started moving around. He was like, yeah, I feel great. And so I was like, awesome, I got my back pain healed, like the person that with the back pain. So I was like, awesome, that's great, could call it a night there. And so I start to kind of turn, and this kid walks up to me, and his name, I can't remember his name. It doesn't really matter what his name was exactly, but he came up to me, and he like kind of had tears in his eyes. Wow. And he was like, hey, so you could tell he was like nervous. He was like, hey, so I love Jesus and I want to follow Jesus, but I keep watching pornography and I can't get free. He's like, will you pray for me? And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I had shared, you know, how unforgiveness plays a role in that. And so I asked him, I was like, hey, so, you know, is there anybody in your life I just felt like that you need to forgive for just anything in general? And he was like, yeah, actually my friend David was the one who introduced me to this. And I haven't been able to forgive him for that. And I was like, well, yeah, let's pray. And so I had my translator lead him in a prayer just of forgiving and releasing that. And then I was like, okay, well, then let's pray for deliverance and believe that God's going to break this off of your life today. And we started praying, and homeboy just started weeping and weeping and weeping. And it was like the sweetest moment. And I knew, like, because I had literally just walked through all that,
Yeah.
and I had so much passion and hatred for that bondage that I was just like, it just all came out, and it was an awesome moment, and you could tell it was really affecting him. And so finished praying, and I'm like, okay, God definitely did something. But, you kind of leave and you're like, I hope that he can kind of get some follow-up help, because that's kind of a journey that you need to walk. There's sometimes it does happen where it's an overnight, like completely redeemed, but a lot of times it's a journey. And so my translator is like, hey, let me tell you my email address. We do kind of a small group basically where you can come and be around guys and like help you walk through this and get free from it. And so he's like, he has to repeat the email a couple times, and the kid's like, okay, I think I got it, but you can tell he's repeating it so many times that you're like, oh my gosh, this is kind of a complex email address. I don't know if this kid's going to remember this. And so he leaves, and I'm like, okay, like definitely something happened when we prayed. I'm believing for complete freedom, but man, it'd be awesome if like he got connected to that group, but he's gone now, and there's no telling if he's ever going to do anything. So we're like packing up, we're about to head out, and the kid comes running back with a notepad and a pen, and he's asking the translator, what was that email address again? And he literally writes it out, and I was like, okay, this kid is getting free for sure, because he is that serious about it. And so I think there were so many powerful moments, and there were so many stories that we heard from the people there, from the feeding programs and the different orphanages that we went to, and just powerful, powerful moments. But I think the thing that I keep telling people when I tell people my story is like, if I could go back and just have that one moment with that one kid, like I would have spent the whole week there just for that one kid. Like I still get pumped up thinking about it. It's so exciting.
And it's so good because I was watching a YouTube video today by one of my favorite music artists named Montel Fish. And he's pretty much talking about how so oftentimes we get consumed in the American church by just the numbers and needing to reach so many people when there's only so much of ourselves that we can give, and we have to remind ourselves like we're supposed to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, and so often that we forget that like he leaves the 99 for the one. And so often there's one person in those types of experiences that we are called to, and that the Spirit is going to speak to them through us. And how even though like on your trip you didn't how can I say this? Not that you didn't feel like you didn't make an impact, but it's just like wanting to encourage you, like, man, like having that right there, like that could very easily be like the purpose. Like God called you into leadership on that trip. And don't be discouraged by like any of the other things that you wanted to see that you didn't want to see. But like, as you said, wanting to relive that moment over for like the rest of your life, like that's how you know that you're living in obedience, is whenever that fruit of joy and the Spirit and peace and just everything is there. It's so good. But yeah, I know something that we wanted to specifically talk to you about because we thought it was cool. Because this was your first trip that you were able to lead specifically. You've been involved in missions in the past, but first one you were able to lead. So how was this trip a little bit different than past trips as a result of that leadership responsibility?
So I personally loved, like, I for some reason I have, like, I'm the type of person that loves being responsible for things, even if like the stuff hits the fan and it all goes bad. Like I'd rather be the one kind of like in charge and responsible for that. And so when I had the opportunity to lead the trip, I was like, yeah, I would love to do that because, and so it was different in the sense that, I mean, it was the only trip that I've been on where I was the only dude. So that was kind of like, that was a very different kind of situation. Dynamic. Yeah, that's the word. than I was used to. And I was kind of concerned because like I have 3 brothers that I'm really close with, and I was like, I'm not gonna have cell service, and like I'm not gonna be able to communicate with these guys, and it's just nice to be able to have like dudes to talk to.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna do, but the ladies on the trip really made it easy on me. It was honestly like there weren't huge bumps in the road, wasn't a lot of drama. It was a very straightforward, like really beautiful trip. And I was just they made leading the trip really easy. And I personally I loved being able to kind of set the tone for some of the team debriefs in the evening. Throughout the day, I mean, we're partnered with Wally, and he is going to take us where we need to go. And there are parts of El Salvador that you do not want to go. He's been there for 16, 17 years, and so he knows the land, and he has relationships with people there, so he knows where the safe places are to go. And so as far as the day-to-day things were concerned, I mean, he took care of all the logistics, so that was really easy for me and my co-leader Priscilla. But I loved being able to take time in the evenings for our team debriefs and our morning devotional times, and really just kind of set the tone for like, hey, we're going out and doing a lot of things, but let's be intentional to slow down, reflect, think about this, think about what the Lord's speaking to us, and really not just get caught up in the do of the trip, but like actually take time to rest and still communicate with one another. And so, like I said, they made it really easy on me, but it was an absolute blast leading the trip.
Yeah.
So.
And then was there any lessons about leadership that God taught you on the trip, just related to leadership at all, whether it's humility, whether it's like responsibility that you were talking about, like anything like that?
Yeah, I think one of the things my co-leader said kind of in the last debrief that we had as a team was kind of like a prophetic, like encouraging moment. And she was like, I felt like you came into this trip kind of like a sheep, but you left like a lion, like you're like you got your roar or something. And I was kind of like, I wonder, like I never would have thought that I was a sheepish person.
Yeah.
But and I think I had learned a little bit to be a little bit more assertive, a little bit more like, okay, literally nobody's going to make this decision. I need to make this decision. And so this is what I'm deciding. This is what we're doing. And so I think that was kind of a big like lesson that I learned. I usually try to not be a super imposing person. Like I have my things that I want to do and my own ideas, but I usually am not the most assertive and like going to run people over. I try to leave room for other people to lead as well. And so I think learning how like, okay, there's an appropriate time where like, okay, it's up to me and I just need to do it and not be so concerned with like how people are going to react, or like sometimes you just got to make the tough decision, and there weren't any like tough decisions to make, but just instead of seeking what everybody else thought, just like, dude, make the decision. You're the leader, like go for it. So I think that was kind of the biggest lesson that I learned.
Dang, that's really, really good.
Yeah, no, I mean that's this has been good for me, man. Just kind of listening, all the different subjects, different topics that you kind of touch. For me, like I mentioned, just kind of having hearing, some of the stories that you guys kind of experienced there, and hearing also your perspective on it. Because going into it, I would have imagined it being like so confident. You're about to go lead, you're so confident, but kind of hearing your perspective, like, man, this is kind of all on me. So I'm like, oh wow, I wasn't expecting that at all.
Yeah.
So kind of hearing you say that, I'm like, wow, this is it's very interesting, but it's awesome just how, God just, man. I mean, we've had, we've talked to so many different people and got so many different perspectives, and one thing that I've been kind of just learning from just sitting back and listening. God really just does what He wants, and He calls you to join in that. And there's such a great reward that comes from it.
Yeah.
There's it's so fulfilling, kind of as you serve, as you bless others, as you pray for others and different things like that. But at the same time, you're also receiving something because you're seeing him in such a different light than you did before, and your relationship just kind of continues to grow. So I think that's one thing that I've honestly just love about these podcasts, and I'm really just like, wow, just how God allows people to grow in uncomfortable situations like Chase always talks about.
Yeah.
And even just encouraging myself to be more uncomfortable in things and really just allow Holy Spirit to really just show up and just, do what he does. I guess it's not really a question, more so just an observation. But yeah, thanks, man. Wow. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's so good. But yeah, I think it'd be cool right now. We'll just give you the opportunity for any sort of like last words. Let's do this. Either you can decide any last words of encouragement that you'd provide to people, or if there's anything from the trip that you've been able to take home and apply to like your mindset here on either like your view on culture, your view on life, your view on serving, like anything like that.
Yeah. So I think a huge thing, I'll do the latter of your two options, just to be clear. So when you go on a trip like that and you're praying and you're feeling the Holy Spirit move through you so much, and you're like, man, this has to be God. Like God's here in this moment, and you sense his presence so much. And then you go back to your hotel room and you're writing about it in your journal, and you're like really processing all this. And you just, it's like a whole week or however long your trip is, you just feel the Lord's presence so much the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get back to the States and it's Monday and you're back at your job, and it's like, oh, well, this is okay. Hang on. What is normal life again, And I really struggled with like that first week back, just kind of feeling like, man, what am I living for? And like, what is, should I quit my job and move to the mission field? Am I like, is God doing something in my heart? And I kind of told some of the members on the trip, like, yeah, I'm kind of fully prepared for God to just totally wreck me on this trip and like cause me to quit my job and, become a full-time missionary or something. And I was like open to that if that was going to happen. So I was trying to be really sensitive to that in the following week. But I think as I was praying about it and thinking about it, I really didn't sense that like being the reason for any sort of unsettledness in my heart. It was more just like you go from this being saturated with the presence of the Lord and being just, you're pretty much on mission the entire time. And with the work that we were doing, it was really just focused on like, okay, let's be as intentional about being as close to Jesus as we can, and then taking that with us to these people that need Jesus. Yeah. And so you go from that to, I work in a regular 9-to-5 job where there's people that don't love Jesus and don't care about, healings, or, I'm sure they would be surprised or whatever, but they're, don't have the same passions. And so for me, I really struggled with like, man, am I like missing something, or should I be, am I doing something wrong? All that. And I really just felt like the Lord was like, no, there's no, like, I almost felt guilty for not praying for somebody if I saw them on the side of the road, or almost felt guilty for not praying for someone that I saw was limping or something. And I'm like, I was literally just in a different country a week ago, and I would have prayed for them and probably saw them healed. And now I'm back in the States and I don't do that. Like, why does that change? And so I think for me, learning to give myself grace to like, okay, yes, take those things with you that you learned. And I do still pray for people. I pray for people that are sick and believe for God to heal them. But just, it doesn't have to be you don't have to feel the pressure to, at every moment, like you're missing out if you're not, being super, if you're not praying for somebody in that moment, then you must not be following God or something. So obviously to be sensitive to his leading, and obviously to always be alert to what he's leading you to do. but just to not feel like the Lord's doesn't like, I felt like the Lord loved me less back in the States than he did when I was doing all this work for him. And the Lord was like, dude, I still love you just as much if you never pray for somebody. And for me, that was a huge perspective shift. So I think that's,
Dang.
yeah.
Dude, that's so good. And that's so encouraging to people, man. Like, that's a really, really good word. But awesome. I think, Josue, you got anything?
Nah, it's like the first time I'm just sitting down, just listening. You know, yeah.
Dude.
Yeah, not a lot of questions, man.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Jared, just want to say again, really appreciate the time,
thanks
man.
for coming out and
Absolutely.
spending time with us.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's
Because
been a pleasure.
we know it's a little late after a long day of work.
Yeah.
And so we really appreciate it. Yeah, and we just want to thank y'all so much just for tuning in. And we just hope you enjoyed the conversation and just some of the things that God was able to just kind of show us through this conversation. We'll go ahead and link all of Jared's information, social medias down below, so that he can hit you with that follow back button. And as always, just feel free to like, comment, share, and send us a message. All of our social media will be linked down below. And that'll be it for today. So much love, y'all.